Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Wixwell's shield growth and why the way it has been implemented is bad game design and what they should do to fix it. We've all seen a lot of the team videos coming out from all the different content creators. I know Bronco has been trying to break the game in Hydra and in Clan Boss using various different rares. We've seen Hell Hades do a bunch of different Clan Boss teams that you can easily get to Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss with the Vault Keeper Wixwell, and it pretty much revolves around his ability here to grow shields. Now, it's not very clear from this in-game description exactly how he is doing it and the way it is working, but effectively the best way to describe how this works is the value of the first 20 shield growths will be equal to the value of the 21st shield growth. Effectively, you are multiplying a multiplier, and it's pretty awful the way it's been programmed, and you'll quickly see why. I'm going to do a very detailed breakdown of exactly how this works and my suggestion as to how they can fix it without necessarily making the champion pointless, because we've seen in the past whenever they've tried to deal with excessive shield problems. A big one that comes to mind is, of course, Corpulent Cadaver. This used to be the original Infinity Comp damage dealer, where he will do damage equal to the value of the shield, and they decided to, in the end, cap it. And I will be honest, the cap that they applied to this was so extreme that Corpulent Cadaver stopped getting used. My suggestion when this guy needed to be fixed was to cap it, but not so extreme, to still allow him to do pretty good damage in different content areas, but they went pretty extreme. Another example where we had a shield growth mechanic which got out of control very quickly was Emic Trunkheart's A1, and they chose to cap this before he became available in the game in the test server. So therefore, before it was publicly released, they nerfed him, and pretty much whenever anyone talks about Emic's shield growth, they always say that they nerfed it aggressively, even though, to be honest, his shield growth wasn't that crazy. But here you can see here it's increasing the shield value by 25%. So it had the similar way that Wixwell is doing it, and they just decided to cap it, which meant that the shield growth pretty much was largely irrelevant. Now, how is Wixwell working? Well, on a very basic level here, how is Wixwell working? He will extend the value of shields depending on the number of buffs in which he increases the duration on, right? So the first part increases the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn, and then he will increase the value of the shields equal to the number of buffs extended. So if you have 5 buffs on a target, it will increase it by the percentage that is hidden in the game code times 5. Now, just to be clear on how this is working, it is a target by target basis. So what it doesn't do is it doesn't add up all of the buffs extended on the team. So if you have 5 buffs on 5 allies, it is not multiplying the shield and increasing the shield by 25. It literally goes to the first target. It extends the buffs on the first target, then it grows the shield depending on the buffs it extends on that target. And then when it goes to the next target, it resets it, because it's very easy to misunderstand this. Some things work globally, some things do not. For example, one of the recent champions that they added to the game, Giath True Shield, has a similar effect where the damage will increase based on each buff that had its duration increased. Now, this one is different because this literally is for every buff on every ally that is extended, increase the damage by 5%. So this is a total combined. Wixwell is a target by target basis. So it will only ever, you can only ever have a single shield growth equal to 10 buffs, right? You can't get more than 10 buffs on a single target. So once you've chosen the number of buffs, for example, if we have 5 buffs, we extend each buff, then that becomes 5 times 3%. It's the 3% that essentially is what it grows by. So every buff you extend is a 3% increase, and then it takes that value, which in this case, if it was 5 buffs, it would be 15%, and then it increases the shield based on the total shield. So it will be 15% of the total shield gets added in to the shield. And this is where it goes wrong, because effectively the bigger you can grow the shield, the more powerful this becomes. Let's do a bit of a math breakdown to explain exactly how this is working. So what I've got here is a sort of an exponential calculation to show you how the shield is growing and why it is coded in a very poor way. Let's start off with a value of 30,000. So this shield value here, this is a base shield. So like we start with a shield set, or maybe we start with an initial shield from another shield application, maybe his A3, for example. Let's go with a 30,000 shield start. Now, one thing to note is don't start with a bolster set, because bolster is a protected set. You can't actually increase the strength of that. So a few people have said, why doesn't it work with bolster set? It's because of the way that bolster is completely immune from any sort of modifications, including duration or strength of shields. You should never use a bolster shield. So when we start with this, let's just assume we have 5 buffs on the target. This means that we're going to do a 3 times 5, and then that percentage is what we're going to take from the current shield, which means that when I use my shield growth ability, the A2 for the first time, then I'm going to add 4,500 into that shield. Now the next time I do it, well, assuming I take no damage, which is unlikely, but let's just assume that's the case, you have 34,500, which means that the next time I use the shield growth, it's going to increase to 5,175. Why? Because the original value in which I'm increasing it by has gone up because I added it on top. And this is where I'm saying it's kind of like a multiplication of a multiplier, because the value in which we are basing the addition is constantly being increased and incremented by the previous version of this. So effectively, I'm multiplying it twice. I'm multiplying it again, and I'm multiplying it again. I'm keep multiplying it. So even though every single time we go through this, we are increasing the shield sort of value, like this is like kind of how much we're increasing. So every step is basically 15% on the previous step. So when we use it for the 5th time, we're going to increase the amount we add to the shield by 15% from the 4th time. That's quite consistent. But when you actually do it from the original, so from the first initial usage of the shield up to the 10th, you can see that actually we've changed the amount we're adding per usage by 252%. Now, you might not think this is an awful problem because maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, 15,000 is not a problem. But here's the thing. When you're fighting over 1,500 boss turns and you're resetting skill abilities, and because of the nature of an exponential growth, what you're actually getting is a significant sort of problem once you hit critical mass. Right, once you start getting down to the 30th usage, well, now we're actually increasing the shield by 259,000. And when you get to the 50th, now you're increasing it by 4.2 million. And when you get to the 60th, you're now increasing it by 17.1 million. And you see what I mean why this is a bad programming. Because effectively the 60th use, so the 17.1 million, basically equates to around about the first 55, I think it works out at. Something like, not quite the first 55, maybe the first 50. The first 50 usages, maybe a little bit less than that, because as you can see, it gets really crazy. Maybe it's the first 47. I'm just doing the quick math here. It's about the first 46 abilities. So the first 46 usages combined is the same value as just 1 on 60. And this is the thing that doesn't really work. It feels pretty bad. When most of us content creators were looking at the quality and strength of the ability on initial glance, we literally created a shield, we put in the shield growth, we went and grew it once and we didn't see any movement. We were saying, well, either the shield growth is bugged or it's pretty weak. Because actually it is. When you start with a small shield, the first extension is pretty poor. It's only 4,500. It's very minuscule. You barely can see it. But because it is based on the total shield, well, when you start getting to these excessive usages, you're able to grow it to such an extent that the shield becomes unbearably strong, to the point where you physically will reach the limit of what you can have. Not because they programmed a cap to shields, but because they've actually got a limit to the number of the shield size you can have, which is the int 32 number. So that's why you will find that most of the Yannicka teams are going to be fairly fixed, because you actually can't do more than 322 million per head because of the way that the shield is capped, right? The shield is capped at 2,147,483,647. And Yannicka will do 15% bonus damage of that shield, which means that the additional damage she does to each head is 322 million, because 15% of this is 322 million. You can't make Yannicka do more damage than this, because it is a fixed hard cap. But if there was no hard cap, look how crazy this number would reach. If we did 100 usages of this growth, it would be 30,634,263,931. It's so large, I actually had to put the number into a idiot's guide way to read a number out loud. And it's because of this exponential shield growth that we're having these situations. Now, when we go into Clan Boss, for example, we know the first 20 attacks of a boss is pretty low damage. It doesn't really damage your shield too much. So if you're able to extend and grow the shield pretty comfortably, well, if you can squeeze in on a 3-1, use that ability every turn, well, by the time you get to 20, you can see that actually now you're probably growing the shield more than the boss can ever deal damage to you until he reaches like turn 70, turn 80, even potentially forever. But if he's never able to deal more damage to the shield than you can grow it, Well, because of the exponential problem, once you get to clan boss 50, well, now we're adding 4 million into the shield. This is the problem. Because he's never actually, there's no way that the clan boss is able to take away 4 million damage in one go, which means that we will always add more shield than the clan boss can deal damage. This breaks the game mode. It breaks the game fundamentals. If you can create a shield bigger than any damage that any boss can do, it's bad game design. It's poorly made. And it's not because shield growth needs to be nerfed. It's because the way that this has been implemented means that the value of shield addition is dynamic when it should be fixed. So how do we solve this problem? Well, what we should do is we should base Wixwell's shield growth on his defense value. Just how we base his shield on his defense value, we should base the growth of that shield on his defense value. So what I would suggest is, for example, if we start with something like a 6,000 defense, we have a defense buff that would give him about 9,600 defense. Say like we start with a shield value of, let's just keep it consistent on 30,000. Well, I would suggest we need to lift it up from a 3% to maybe a sort of a, I don't know, 15% to make it feel reasonable. And then when we grow it, you can see that initially we're going to get a pretty big addition. Let's do it with 5 buffs as well. Let's just do it like this number. The numbers could be varied, like you can do 15%, 20%, depending how you feel it works. But what you will notice here is the growth of the shield is not going to be as extreme when you get to the higher ends, but the initial growth is going to be better than the other side, right? Because we are essentially doing it off a fixed value. So every single time he uses this ability, so long as his defense stays the same and you have 5 buffs on the target, you will add the same amount to your shield every single time. And as you can see, the value becomes much healthier. If we compare this to a 88th usage, let's just do it to a clan boss 50 here, right? And let's just put this as a green cell here. Let's just hide these columns. Now you can see the difference in what I'm suggesting here is the fix. We're still creating a pretty healthy shield at 382,000, although that would be diminished by the damage, but it's no longer scaling the same aggressiveness. You can see that actually we start off with a better scale initially, and then by around about turn 10, that's when Wixwell's current one will take over because the exponential problem. But what we're actually doing is adding to the shield in a consistent manner because the number we're basing our shield growth off never changes. Whereas the current problem is it always changes, which means that the higher usages are going to grow it to an extreme value. You can see this is where it gets game breaking, and this is where we should do it. So this is what I would suggest is a good fix. You adjust the number so that it's basing off his defense, and then you increase the percentage value per buff to a number that feels healthy. Like if we feel like 15% is too weak, we could go to 20%. That would give us a 960. You know, that's basically, I think, around about double. Let me just see what's going on here. Let's hide these numbers. There you go. So it's about double what we're currently getting at the first usages, which means it feels better when you're using it one time in an arena setting or in a wave setting. It feels like it actually has an impact for you early on. But what it doesn't mean is you're not, you know, by about turn 7, then it starts evening out and you don't get this exponential. But if we still feel like that's not enough, then again, maybe you go to what the Brogni value is, which is 30% of his damage, and you extend it to that value. So you get a pretty good extension early on. But again, even if we get to like turn 50, it's nowhere near the comparison, and it still will be a pretty strong addition like the old Infinity Comp with Brogni is, but it won't break the game. So that is the fundamental crux of the Wixwell problem. He's growing the shield based on the current shield, which means that once you start growing the current shield to an extreme level, there's no way that the game can ever outdo the shield growth, and it becomes a pretty aggressive problem to the point where reaching this value is pretty easy to do. What I did here, just as a quick example to see how it would work, is I basically plugged in the maximum amount of damage we could do here, 2145, and I wanted to work out exactly when we were going to hit cap. Exactly when. So you can see that by about turn 81 here, we've hit cap with these sort of 5 buffs. But if we actually increase this to 10 buffs, let's just say you're running in Hydra, you've managed to get them maximized to 10 buffs, well, you're going to hit cap at like 44 turns. Now, we could go as crazy if we didn't have this limit. This is the kind of numbers you can reach this growth with. You know, whatever this is, like 5 quintillion number. Obviously, the game cannot handle more than the int32 value, but if it didn't have that limit, this is what would end up happening with Yannicka. She would be able to take 15% of this value if there was no limit. It would break the game, whereas in my system here, it would only ever reach to about 1455. Even if we were to put 10 buffs on here, it wouldn't go any higher than about 2 million shield. But as you can imagine, like, because you're only adding 28,000, if the boss starts dealing more than 28,000, which is likely, then you're, by about turn, let's say turn 30 with the boss is likely to deal more than sort of 28,000 damage to you. So this shield will start decreasing. But in the current system, you're adding 6 million shield. So therefore, the boss is never going to catch up on you. It's never going to be a solution. So there you go, guys. That is the fundamental flaw in the design mechanics of Wixwell. We don't need a cap. We need to change what the growth is based on and balance the number so that we get a better initial extension, but we don't have this exponential multiplication where it's multiplying off this dynamic shield value we've got, to the point where Wixwell essentially breaks the game. He breaks the core fundamentals of the game. Now, I'm not here to basically kill the Yannicka comp and all these things. I still think that could work, potentially, if you can grow the shield enough. Like, the whole Togron comp can still work, but you've got to be reasonable to the concept of game balance. You cannot have a shield reaching the int 32 value and just exponentially growing so that enemies can't do more damage than what the shield growth is. It's just it's really bad game design. I don't know where the testing went with this, but what I would do is I would flip it so that the growth of the shield is based on a fixed known quantity, and I would suggest his defense value, which a player can control, is the way to do it. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think about this. I know I've kind of not done a lot of Wixwell content. I feel like a lot of content creators are doing a pretty good job of explaining how to use him. I personally am less interested in having teams built around one champion where you just basically put one ability in and the content doesn't matter anymore. Add in the fact that he has intercept buff. You basically don't even have to figure any mechanics out in Clan Boss. You just put him in a standard 2-1 and you win the game. It's a bit depressing. So I've kind of stayed away from that content personally because I don't find it interesting, but I know it's been of great assistance to a lot of players. So I don't want them to nuke the shield growth. I just want them to balance the shield growth so it doesn't break the game. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think, and I will catch you in the next video.